Chapter 8. Cultural Perspectives on Sex. 8.1 Sexuality in Eastern Cultures. Sexuality within Eastern cultures is a tapestry of beliefs, practices, and values that have been woven over millennia. It is influenced by a variety of factors including religion, historical precedents, and societal norms. Understanding the nuances of how Eastern societies perceive and engage with sexuality requires a respectful examination of these complex and often deeply rooted cultural elements. In many Eastern cultures, sexuality has traditionally been viewed within the context of family and societal duties. The emphasis often lies on procreation within the sanctity of marriage, and sexual behavior outside of this framework might be seen as taboo or discouraged. This view is often underpinned by religious teachings and philosophical ideals that prioritize social harmony and the continuation of lineage. However, this does not mean that Eastern cultures lack a history of celebrating sexuality. For instance, ancient texts and artworks, such as the Kama Sutra in India or the erotic pottery of ancient China, reveal a rich legacy of acknowledging and documenting sexual pleasure. These cultural artifacts highlight that the pursuit of sexual joy has been a recognized aspect of life, although its public discussion may be constrained. The role of modesty and privacy in discussions and expressions of sexuality is a significant feature in many Eastern cultures. Open conversations about sexual matters are often considered private and not for public discourse, which can impact the availability of sexual education and open dialogue about sexual health and rights. In contemporary Eastern societies, there is a spectrum of attitudes towards sexuality, with rapid modernization and globalization influencing change. Exposure to Western ideas about sexuality and individual rights has prompted conversations and sometimes clashes between traditional values and modern perspectives. Gender roles within Eastern cultures can also play a pivotal role in shaping attitudes towards sexuality. The traditional expectations placed upon men and women can influence everything from the acceptability of expressing sexual desire to the responsibilities associated with sexual activity and family planning. The concept of honor and chastity, especially as it pertains to women, has a profound impact on sexuality within many Eastern cultures. The social stigma attached to premarital sexual activity or the violation of traditional gender norms can have serious, sometimes life-threatening consequences. Arranged marriages, which are still practiced in some Eastern cultures, have their own implications for sexuality. Partners in such marriages may face the challenge of developing a sexual relationship without the prelude of a romantic courtship, relying on the growth of love and sexual rapport over time. LGBTQ+ rights and visibility vary greatly across Eastern cultures. In some regions, there is increasing acceptance and legal protection for LGBTQ+ individuals, while in others, non-heteronormative sexuality remains a taboo subject, often faced with legal prohibitions and social ostracism. In recent years, there has been a growing movement within many Eastern societies to address issues such as sexual health, consent, and gender-based violence. Activists and organizations are working to promote a more open and equitable dialogue about sexuality, challenging long-held stereotypes and advocating for sexual rights. Sexuality in Eastern cultures is a complex interplay of tradition, modernity, personal belief, and societal norms. While there are common threads that run through these cultures, there is also a rich diversity in how sexuality is understood and lived. As Eastern societies continue to evolve, the dialogue on sexuality is expanding, reflecting a dynamic interplay between the past and the present, the individual and the collective. 8.2 Western Attitudes Towards Sex. Western attitudes towards sex have been shaped by a variety of historical, cultural, and social factors. In contemporary Western societies, there is a broad spectrum of beliefs about sex, ranging from conservative to liberal. These attitudes are influenced by religious backgrounds, cultural traditions, individual experiences, and the prevailing norms within each society. Historically, in Western cultures, religious institutions have had a significant impact on attitudes towards sex. Many Judeo-Christian traditions have promoted the idea of sex primarily for procreation within the bounds of marriage. While these views still hold sway in many communities, there has been a considerable shift towards a more permissive attitude about sexual expression, recognizing it as a natural and enjoyable aspect of human experience. In modern Western societies, there is a growing acceptance of the diversity of sexual orientations and identities. This is reflected in the increased visibility and rights of LGBTQ+ communities. Public discussions about gender and sexuality have become more common, and there is a greater emphasis on equality and respect for individual choice regarding sexual expression. The concept of sexual freedom, which emerged strongly in the West during the sexual revolution of the 1960s, continues to influence contemporary attitudes. This movement challenged traditional norms regarding sexuality, advocating for the right to engage in sex freely without legal or social constraints and for pleasure as well as procreation. In Western cultures, there is also an increasing focus on consent and the importance of mutual agreement in sexual encounters. The phrase "no means no" has evolved into "yes means yes," emphasizing that consent should be enthusiastic and ongoing. This shift is part of a broader societal response to issues of sexual harassment and assault. The role of sex education in shaping attitudes toward sex is significant. In many Western countries, sex education in schools includes topics such as contraception, STI prevention, and healthy relationships. However, the extent and content of this education can vary greatly, with some regions adopting comprehensive approaches and others focusing on abstinence. Media and technology have also played a pivotal role in shaping Western attitudes towards sex. The proliferation of sexually explicit material on the internet has made sexual content more accessible. While this can promote a more open attitude towards sexuality, it also raises concerns about the objectification of bodies, unrealistic sexual expectations, and the impact on adolescent development. The notion of sexual agency is highly valued in Western cultures. Individuals are encouraged to make informed choices about their sexual lives, including the number of partners they have, the types of sexual activities they engage in, and the manner in which they pursue sexual fulfillment. Western attitudes towards sex also recognize the importance of sexual health and the right to access healthcare services. This includes preventative measures, treatment of sexual dysfunctions, and reproductive rights. There is an understanding that a healthy sexual life is an important component of overall well-being. Despite the trend toward liberalization, there remains a spectrum of attitudes in Western societies. Some individuals and communities hold more traditional views, emphasizing sexual restraint and fidelity. These differing attitudes can sometimes lead to tensions and debates about the role of sex in society. Western attitudes toward sex are diverse and evolving. They reflect a culture that is increasingly open to a range of sexual expressions and identities, while also grappling with the implications of this openness. As Western societies continue to navigate these changes, the conversation about sex remains dynamic, highlighting the ongoing negotiation between personal freedom and societal norms. 8.3 Sexuality in Indigenous Cultures. Sexuality within indigenous cultures is often interwoven with the broader tapestry of spiritual beliefs, community relations, and a deep connection to the natural world. Indigenous perspectives on sexuality can differ vastly from those in Western and Eastern societies, with some holding unique beliefs about the fluidity of gender and the role of sexual expression in cultural practices. In many indigenous cultures, sexuality is not confined to the private sphere, but is a vital aspect of community life and ritual. Sexuality and the act of creation are frequently honored in myths, songs, dances, and ceremonies, highlighting the reverence for procreation and fertility as forces that are integral to the continuity of life and the community. Gender roles in some indigenous cultures are less rigid than those found in many other societies. There is often a recognition of multiple gender identities beyond the binary male and female. For instance, some Native American cultures recognize two-spirit individuals, who embody traits of both genders and hold special roles within their communities. The concept of respect is central to indigenous teachings about sexuality. This encompasses respect for personal autonomy, mutual consent, and the understanding that sexual expression is a part of everyone's journey towards self-knowledge and connection with others. Sex education in these cultures might be more holistic, involving elders passing down knowledge about the physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of sex. Sexual rites of passage can be important markers within indigenous cultures, signifying the transition from childhood to adulthood. These rites often involve teachings about the responsibilities and social meanings of sexual behavior, preparing young individuals for their roles as sexual beings within their communities. In many indigenous cultures, the land and environment are seen as interconnected with human life, including sexuality. The cycles of the earth and seasons are often mirrored in human sexual cycles, and this connection is celebrated through rituals and storytelling. This worldview promotes a harmonious balance between human sexuality and the natural world. Colonization has deeply impacted indigenous cultures, including attitudes towards sexuality. The imposition of foreign moral systems and religions has often suppressed traditional beliefs and practices, sometimes resulting in the stigmatization of pre-colonial sexual norms and identities. Despite this, many indigenous communities are working to revive and reclaim their traditional sexual values. Indigenous concepts of family and kinship often extend beyond the nuclear family model prevalent in Western societies. In these extended family structures, the responsibility for sex education and support during life events related to sexuality may be shared among many relatives, not just the parents. This approach fosters a sense of community involvement and support in matters of sexual development and health. The balance of feminine and masculine energies is a theme in some indigenous cultures' understanding of sexuality. Rather than being seen as opposing forces, they are often viewed as complementary, with both necessary for the wholeness and well-being of individuals and the community. This balance is sometimes reflected in the gender roles and sexual relations within these cultures. In contemporary indigenous communities, there is often a struggle to navigate the intersection of traditional beliefs with modern challenges, including issues related to sexual health. Access to healthcare, education about sexually transmitted infections, and the protection of sexual rights are ongoing concerns that indigenous peoples face today. Sexuality in indigenous cultures is rich and varied, deeply rooted in a complex web of spiritual, social, and environmental connections. Understanding these perspectives requires a respectful consideration of the diversity of indigenous experiences and an appreciation for the ways in which these cultures conceptualize and live out sexual health and expression. As indigenous communities continue to assert their rights and sovereignty, there is an increasing recognition of the importance of preserving and honoring their unique sexual traditions and knowledge. 8.4 African Perspectives on Sexuality. Sexuality within African cultures is diverse and multifaceted, shaped by the vast array of societies, religions, and traditions found across the continent. These perspectives are deeply rooted in the social fabric of each community and are influenced by a blend of indigenous beliefs, colonial history, and modern influences. Understanding the nuances of African sexuality requires a look at the interplay of these factors and how they manifest in the contemporary lives of individuals and communities. In many traditional African societies, sexuality is closely linked to family, community, and the life cycle. It is seen not just as a means for procreation, but also as an integral part of the social structure, contributing to the continuity and cohesion of the community. Sexual norms and behaviors are often guided by customs that define acceptable sexual conduct within specific social contexts, such as marriage and kinship systems. Marriage in many African cultures is not only a union between individuals, but also between families and even communities. It often involves negotiations, dowry, or bride price, which are not merely transactions but symbolize the joining of groups. Within these unions, sexuality is often discussed openly in the context of fertility and family obligations. Rites of passage are significant in many African cultures and can include ceremonies or educational periods that mark the transition from childhood to adulthood. These often involve teachings about sexuality, preparing young people for their roles and responsibilities as sexual beings within their communities. Such rites can foster a healthy respect for the power and sacredness of sexual relations. African perspectives on gender roles can have a profound impact on sexual dynamics. While there is great variation, many societies are patriarchal, with men traditionally holding more overt power in sexual decision-making. However, women often exercise influence in more subtle, culturally sanctioned ways, and gender roles are continuously evolving. The legacy of colonialism has significantly impacted African sexual norms. Colonial powers often imposed their own moral frameworks, which sometimes conflicted with indigenous sexual customs. This history has led to a complex tapestry of sexual attitudes today, where traditional beliefs may coexist with or resist those introduced during colonial rule. In the context of religion, the majority of African societies have been influenced by Christianity and Islam, which have their own prescriptions regarding sexuality. These religious doctrines can affect attitudes towards premarital sex, contraception, homosexuality, and gender expression, often resulting in conservative views about sexual behavior. Modern African societies are experiencing shifts in sexual attitudes due to globalization, urbanization, and the influence of Western media. Younger generations in particular may hold different views about sexuality compared to their elders, leading to generational differences and discussions about sexual morality, rights, and freedoms. African countries are increasingly grappling with issues of sexual health and rights, including the fight against HIV/AIDS, access to reproductive health services, and the recognition of LGBTQ+ rights. Activists and organizations across the continent are working to promote sexual health education, protect sexual rights, and challenge stigma and discrimination. The diversity of African cultures means there is no singular African perspective on sexuality. Each community has its own set of norms, which can be influenced by ethnicity, location, and socioeconomic status. While some communities may be open and permissive about sexual matters, others may be more restrictive. African perspectives on sexuality are as varied and dynamic as the continent itself. They reflect a rich interplay of tradition, historical influence, and contemporary change. As African societies continue to evolve, so too do the attitudes and practices surrounding sexuality, with an increasing emphasis on individual rights, health, and well-being within the cultural context. 8.5 Middle Eastern Views on Sex. Middle Eastern views on sex are shaped by a complex tapestry of historical, religious, and cultural influences. The region's predominant religion, Islam, plays a significant role in shaping attitudes and practices related to sexuality. However, it is important to recognize the diversity within Middle Eastern societies, where traditions and beliefs can vary widely from one country to another, and even within countries, from one community to the next. In traditional Middle Eastern cultures, sex is often regarded as a private matter, with modesty being a valued attribute. Discussions about sex are typically reserved for certain contexts, such as within the family or between spouses. This privacy is not indicative of a denial of sexuality, but rather a cultural norm where sexual matters are kept out of the public sphere. The concept of honor is deeply interwoven with sexuality in many Middle Eastern societies. Family honor can be closely tied to sexual behavior, particularly that of women. As such, behaviors such as premarital sex can be viewed as dishonorable not only to the individual, but to their family. This perspective can lead to a strong emphasis on chastity and virginity, especially for women before marriage. Marriage is often seen as the appropriate context for sexual activity, with procreation being a central purpose. Within the sanctity of marriage, sex is not only permissible, but encouraged. The marital relationship is understood to be an important part of personal fulfillment, and sexual satisfaction is recognized as a key component of a healthy marriage. Religious texts such as the Quran and Hadith provide guidance on sexual conduct, emphasizing principles such as mutual satisfaction and respect between spouses. These texts outline permissible sexual behaviors and prohibit others, shaping the moral framework within which individuals are expected to operate. Modern Middle Eastern societies are undergoing change, with increased exposure to global ideas about sexuality through media and the Internet. This exposure has sparked debates about traditional norms and has led to varying degrees of social transformation. Some individuals and groups advocate for more open discussions about sexuality, while others hold firmly to conservative views. There is a growing awareness in some parts of the Middle East about the importance of sexual health education, particularly in the context of preventing sexually transmitted infections and managing reproductive health. However, the extent and nature of this education can be limited by cultural sensitivities and the preference for teaching about sexuality within the family rather than in public settings. Women's rights movements within the Middle East have begun to challenge some of the traditional views on sexuality, advocating for greater autonomy and protection from practices such as child marriage and honor-based violence. These movements strive to shift the discourse toward a more equitable understanding of sexuality that respects the rights and dignity of all individuals. Homosexuality remains a contentious issue in many Middle Eastern societies, with strong cultural and religious prohibitions against same-sex relationships. However, there are signs of a nascent dialogue and activism around LGBTQ+ rights in some areas, indicating a potential for gradual change. Gender roles prescribed by cultural and religious norms can also dictate attitudes towards sex, often reinforcing a patriarchal structure where male sexuality is viewed differently from female sexuality. This dichotomy can affect everything from the acceptance of polygamy to expectations around male and female sexual behavior. Middle Eastern views on sex are deeply influenced by religion, culture, and tradition. While there are conservative attitudes that emphasize sexual activity within marriage and associate sexuality with family honor, there are also signs of evolving perspectives and growing discussions about sexual health and rights. As with any region, the Middle East is not monolithic, and its views on sex are diverse and dynamic, reflective of a region in the midst of social and cultural shifts. 8.6 Sex in Scandinavian societies. Scandinavian societies are often perceived as progressive with regard to sexual openness and equality. These attitudes are rooted in a cultural framework that values individual freedom, gender equality, and a pragmatic approach to human sexuality. In these Northern European countries, sex is generally viewed as a natural and positive aspect of life, and this perspective is reflected in both social policies and personal attitudes. In Scandinavian education systems, comprehensive sex education is a standard part of the curriculum. From a young age, children are taught about anatomy, reproduction, consent, and safe sex practices. This education is grounded in the belief that knowledge empowers individuals to make informed decisions about their sexual health and relationships. It is also indicative of a societal commitment to reducing the stigma around sexual issues and promoting open dialogue. Gender equality is a cornerstone of Scandinavian societies, and this extends to attitudes towards sex. There is a strong emphasis on mutual respect and the idea that all individuals, regardless of gender, have the right to sexual autonomy and pleasure. This egalitarian approach helps to foster environments where coercion and gender-based sexual expectations are less tolerated. The Scandinavian approach to public policy on sexuality is characterized by a focus on health and well-being rather than moral judgment. For instance, access to contraception, sexual health services, and support for sexual minorities is widely available and publicly funded. This approach reflects a societal view that sees sexual health as an integral part of overall public health. In Scandinavian countries, there is also a more relaxed attitude toward nudity and the human body, which is evident in public spaces such as saunas, beaches, and in the media. This normalization of the body contributes to a less sexualized view of nudity and a more relaxed attitude towards physicality and sex. Attitudes toward non-traditional relationships and family structures in Scandinavian societies tend to be accepting. Same-sex marriage, cohabitation without marriage, and child-rearing outside of traditional marriage are generally socially accepted. This inclusivity is indicative of a broader societal acceptance of diverse sexual orientations and relationship models. Scandinavian media and arts are known for their candid portrayal of sexuality, often tackling subjects that might be considered taboo in other cultures. This openness in popular culture can help to demystify sex and promote a healthy understanding of sexuality as a normal part of the human experience. Despite these progressive attitudes, Scandinavian societies are not without their challenges when it comes to sex. Like anywhere else, issues such as sexual harassment, assault, and consent are topics of public concern and debate. The #MeToo movement, for example, has sparked discussions in Scandinavia just as it has around the world, highlighting that there is still work to be done in addressing sexual misconduct. While Scandinavian countries have liberal laws regarding pornography, they also have robust discussions about the impact of pornographic content on society. These debates balance the defense of free expression with concerns about objectification and the shaping of unrealistic sexual expectations. The progressive nature of Scandinavian attitudes towards sex is also reflected in their international advocacy. Scandinavian nations are often at the forefront of promoting sexual health and rights on the global stage, working to combat sexually transmitted infections, gender-based violence, and discrimination against sexual minorities. Sex in Scandinavian societies is approached with openness, equality, and a focus on health and well-being. While these societies are not without their sexual challenges, they offer models of how a progressive, informed, and inclusive approach to sexuality can be integrated into public policy and cultural norms. These attitudes create a foundation for individuals to explore and express their sexuality in a safe and respected environment. 8.7 Latin American Sexual Attitudes. Latin American sexual attitudes are deeply influenced by a mix of indigenous, European, and African cultures, combined with the prevailing influence of the Catholic Church. Despite the region's reputation for passion and expressiveness, these societies often harbor conservative views regarding sexuality, particularly when it is discussed in the public sphere. However, there is a dynamic tension between traditional values and modern expressions of sexuality. In many Latin American cultures, the concept of machismo, which can be defined as a strong or exaggerated sense of manliness, has historically influenced sexual attitudes. It often emphasizes male dominance and traditional gender roles, affecting how sexuality is expressed and perceived within society. However, this is being increasingly challenged and redefined by contemporary movements advocating for gender equality and respect for women's autonomy over their bodies. The influence of the Catholic Church has been pivotal in shaping attitudes towards sex, often promoting abstinence outside of marriage and traditional family values. However, this is not uniform across the region, and there are varying degrees of adherence to these teachings, with some communities embracing more liberal attitudes, particularly in urban areas. In recent years, there has been a growing movement within Latin America to address issues of sexual health, education, and rights. Comprehensive sex education, which includes discussions about contraception, STI prevention, and consent, is becoming more common, although it is still a subject of debate and varies widely by country. The region has seen an increase in activism related to LGBTQ+ rights, with significant strides being made in some countries towards marriage equality and anti-discrimination laws. These changes reflect a broader shift towards the recognition of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities in Latin American societies. The public celebration of sexuality is evident in many Latin American cultural expressions, such as Carnival, which is known for its vibrant and sensual atmosphere. Such events highlight the region's capacity for joyous and open celebration of the body and sexuality, even within societies that can be conservative about sexual matters. Despite the vibrant public celebrations of sexuality, there remains a stigma attached to open discussions about sex within many families. Conversations about sexual health and behavior are often considered taboo, which can limit young people's access to accurate information and resources. Gender-based violence and inequality remain significant issues within Latin America, impacting women's sexual autonomy and safety. Efforts to combat these problems include public campaigns, legal reforms, and support services for survivors, indicating a societal push towards greater protection and empowerment of women. Teen pregnancy rates in Latin America are among the highest in the world, highlighting challenges in access to contraception and sexual education. Addressing this issue is complex and involves not only improving healthcare services, but also challenging cultural norms around sexuality and gender. In urban areas, particularly in larger cities, there is evidence of a more progressive attitude towards sex. Younger generations are increasingly engaging with global perspectives on sexuality through media and the internet, which is contributing to a gradual shift in attitudes. Latin American sexual attitudes are a reflection of the region's rich cultural diversity and history. While traditional and often conservative views still hold significant influence, there is a noticeable trend towards more open and progressive attitudes, particularly among the younger generation. The ongoing dialogue around sexuality in Latin America is indicative of a society in flux, grappling with the challenges of reconciling long-standing cultural norms with evolving modern values. 8.8 Sexuality in the Caribbean. Sexuality in the Caribbean is influenced by the region's diverse history, including indigenous cultures, European colonialism, African heritage, and more recent global influences. This blend of traditions has created unique attitudes towards sex that are both complex and varied across the different islands and communities. While the Caribbean is often associated with a laid-back, sensual culture, the reality is nuanced, with a range of conservative and liberal attitudes coexisting. The influence of religion on Caribbean sexuality cannot be overstated. Predominantly Christian, the region has a strong legacy of religious teachings that shape sexual morals and behaviors. The Catholic and Protestant churches have historically promoted the idea of sex within marriage, and often hold conservative views on matters such as contraception and homosexuality. However, these views are challenged and interpreted differently among various communities and individuals. In many Caribbean societies, there is a cultural celebration of fertility and the female form, as seen in local festivals and music. Dance and music, especially genres like reggae and soca, often celebrate and explore themes of sexuality, sometimes with a frankness that contrasts with the more conservative religious rhetoric. Caribbean literature and folklore are rich with stories and characters that reflect a deep engagement with themes of sexuality. These narratives often explore the tensions between individual desire and social expectations, offering a window into the complex ways that sexuality is woven into the fabric of Caribbean life. Despite a vibrant cultural scene that celebrates sexuality, discussions about sexual health and education can be limited. Access to sex education varies widely, with some areas offering comprehensive programs, while in others it remains a taboo topic. The result can be a gap in knowledge that affects individuals' ability to make informed decisions about their sexual health. Gender roles within the Caribbean often reflect traditional views, with expectations for masculine and feminine behavior influencing sexual dynamics. However, gender norms are being questioned and renegotiated, particularly by younger generations and within more urbanized areas. The Caribbean has a growing LGBTQ+ community, and while acceptance varies greatly by country and community, there has been progress in terms of visibility and rights. Advocacy groups are working to combat discrimination and promote equality, although they often face significant opposition from conservative sectors. Teenage pregnancy is a significant issue in many Caribbean nations, and efforts to address it involve not just improving access to contraception, but also cultural shifts in the approach to sex education and youth empowerment. The Caribbean diaspora has brought issues of sexuality and identity to the global stage, with Caribbean artists and writers often addressing these topics in their work. This global conversation has helped to challenge stereotypes and bring more diverse Caribbean voices into discussions about sexuality. Despite the region's sunny and relaxed image, the Caribbean faces serious challenges related to sexual health, including high rates of HIV/AIDS in some areas. Initiatives to improve sexual health services, promote safe sex practices, and reduce stigma are critical components of public health strategies in the region. Sexuality in the Caribbean is a vibrant and complex aspect of the region's culture. It is shaped by a rich tapestry of historical influences and expressed through a variety of cultural practices. While there are conservative elements rooted in tradition and religion, there is also a dynamic and evolving conversation about sexuality that reflects the diversity and adaptability of Caribbean societies. As the region continues to grapple with issues of sexual health, rights, and education, these discussions are likely to play an important role in shaping the future of Caribbean sexual attitudes. 8.9 Modern Global Influences on Sexuality. In the contemporary era, sexuality is not confined within geographical or cultural boundaries, but is influenced by global trends, media, and communication technologies. The interconnectedness facilitated by the Internet and social media platforms has led to the exchange of ideas and attitudes about sex at an unprecedented rate. This global conversation is constantly reshaping how individuals and societies understand and express their sexuality. Media, both traditional and new, play a significant role in the modern discourse on sexuality. Television shows, films, and online content often portray diverse sexualities and relationship models, challenging traditional norms and taboos. Through these media, individuals are exposed to different sexual practices and lifestyles, which can influence their personal attitudes and behaviors. The globalization of sex education is another significant modern influence. Access to the Internet means that people worldwide can obtain sexual health information that may not be available in their own communities. This access can be empowering, particularly for those in regions where sex education is limited or censored. The international LGBTQ+ rights movement has had profound global influence, with events such as pride parades and campaigns for marriage equality gaining worldwide attention. This movement has brought issues of sexual orientation and gender identity to the forefront, promoting a broader understanding and acceptance of the spectrum of human sexuality. The travel and tourism industry also has an impact on global sexuality. The exchange of cultural values and sexual attitudes can occur when individuals from different parts of the world interact, sometimes leading to the adoption of new sexual norms or the reinforcement of existing ones. Global health initiatives, such as those targeting HIV/AIDS, have shaped conversations about sexuality, emphasizing the importance of safe sex practices and the destigmatization of sexually transmitted infections. These initiatives often involve multinational collaborations and the sharing of resources and knowledge across borders. Feminist and women's rights movements have made significant contributions to the global dialogue on sexuality, advocating for issues such as bodily autonomy, reproductive rights, and the fight against sexual violence. The impact of these movements has been felt worldwide, influencing legislation, policy, and social attitudes. The proliferation of dating and hookup apps represents a shift in how relationships are formed and how sexual encounters are negotiated. These platforms have globalized the dating scene, allowing individuals to connect with potential partners from different cultures and geographical locations. Modern global influences on sexuality are also evident in the consumer market, with the international trade of sex toys, sexual enhancement products, and erotic entertainment. The accessibility and normalization of these products contribute to a more open and commercialized view of sex. While the global exchange of sexual attitudes and information has many positive aspects, it also raises concerns about cultural imperialism and the homogenization of sexuality. There is a risk that dominant cultural narratives, particularly from Western societies, could overshadow local traditions and values. Modern global influences on sexuality are vast and dynamic, driving changes in how sex is understood, discussed, and experienced. These influences have the power to challenge stigmas, expand rights, and promote health and well-being. However, they also require a critical approach to ensure that the global dialogue on sexuality remains inclusive, respectful, and sensitive to the diversity of sexual expressions around the world. 8.10 Cross-cultural dialogues on sex. Cross-cultural dialogues on sex are pivotal in the current global landscape, where diverse sexual norms and values interact and often clash. These dialogues are essential for fostering mutual understanding and respect among various cultures. They enable the sharing of knowledge and perspectives, leading to more inclusive and comprehensive approaches to sexuality. One of the foundational aspects of cross-cultural dialogues on sex is the recognition of the vast array of sexual norms that exist worldwide. These norms are shaped by various factors, including religion, tradition, law, and the evolution of social mores. Discussions that acknowledge this diversity can challenge ethnocentric views and pave the way for more nuanced understandings of sexuality. Such dialogues often begin in academic and policy-making arenas, where scholars and experts from different cultural backgrounds come together to discuss sexual health, rights, and education. These settings provide a platform for examining how different societies approach topics such as consent, gender identity, and reproductive health, among others. The exchange of cultural practices and values regarding sex has been facilitated by international travel and migration. As people move and settle in new environments, they bring their sexual attitudes and practices with them, contributing to the cultural melting pot of their host communities and enriching the local sexual culture. International conferences and symposiums on sexual health and rights are instrumental in creating spaces for cross-cultural dialogue. These gatherings allow for the sharing of research, strategies, and stories, contributing to global efforts to improve sexual health and promote sexual rights. The rise of global communication networks, especially social media, has dramatically increased the potential for cross-cultural exchange on issues of sex and sexuality. These platforms can amplify marginalized voices, disseminate diverse sexual narratives, and facilitate international support networks. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and advocacy groups play a crucial role in cross-cultural dialogues on sex. They work across borders to address sexual health crises, fight for the rights of sexual minorities, and challenge harmful practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM, and forced marriages. Cultural exchanges on sex can also be challenging, as they sometimes reveal stark differences in values and practices. For instance, what is considered a sexual right in one culture may be taboo in another. Navigating these differences requires sensitivity and a commitment to dialogue rather than coercion. Education systems are increasingly incorporating cross-cultural perspectives on sex, teaching students not only about their own society's norms but also about those in other cultures. This educational approach prepares young people to engage with the global community with empathy and informed awareness. However, cross-cultural dialogues on sex must also grapple with the legacies of colonialism and imperialism, which have historically imposed certain sexual norms on various cultures. Reckoning with this past is part of developing a more equitable global conversation about sexuality. Cross-cultural dialogues on sex are critical for building a world where different sexual norms are understood and respected. These conversations contribute to the global effort to ensure that all individuals have the knowledge, freedom, and rights to express their sexuality in safe and fulfilling ways. As these dialogues continue to evolve, they hold the promise of a more sexually inclusive and healthy global community.